Welcome to the afternoon constitutional and coming to you live from Freedomfest here in Memphis, Tennessee, which, and I could explain it to you in a long time, but it would probably bore you to death anyway, is much more of a fun city than Lost Wages, Nevada for these events. And thanks to our sponsors, Government Accountability and Oversight Group, govoversight.org. Please, our favorite four-letter word is FOIA. And we find out all the little cubby holes that they don't want you looking in. It's not just about FOIAing the Commonwealth's attorney. It's about the university that's been emailing with the Commonwealth's attorney about letting them use some lawyers to work off the books for them and things like that. Joining us this afternoon is Nico Perrino. He is from FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. Nico, thank you so much, first and foremost, for coming by and visiting with us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to be here.
Doing what you do as well. Tell us a little bit about FIRE, because our flagship city is in Charlottesville, Virginia, and the University of Virginia has been mentioned a few times through FIRE.
Yeah. It sure has, and in fact, we've had interns at the University of Virginia over the years who have done some really good work there, highlighting some of the challenges for free expression at that school, fighting some of the cases there. Which
is such a shame, because that was the whole point Jefferson had, whatever you may say about his beliefs in biology. In founding the university was to have free expression in between professors and students and other students, and I think it's just an affront to him.
Oh, absolutely.
Have that happen.
I mean, our colleges and universities are places for the dissemination, preservation, and creation of knowledge. Yeah. And the best way to do that, right, is to have open discourse. Mm-hmm. Yale, which is its own set of problems, has something called the Woodward Report, which says that those who are in that academic community should be able to think the unthinkable, challenge the unchallengeable, and mention the unmentionable. Now, when you try to hold them up to those promises, they say, oh, these are just statements of principles. These aren't contractual promises. Actually, there is a court case going on right now where a faculty member was fired and tried to appeal to this Woodward Report, that lofty language. Right. And the university said, oh, no, this isn't a promise we make you. This is just a statement of principles, right? So they want to try and have it both ways. They want to get the credit for the free speech promises, but not actually fulfill them.
So I imagine that's in the name of that fellow who wrote for and then eventually ran the Washington Post, Bob
Woodward? No, actually, I think it was a professor who led a committee that ended up producing what ended up being called the Woodward Report.
Okay, because I would imagine the Nixon family would like to have the same business about in any event. So talk about what's happening on our college campuses to stop that exchange of knowledge and information, because a lot of people will get gaslit into shying away from the conversation because they'll say, oh, you're just conspiracy theorists. You don't understand. This isn't about this is about hate speech. This is about white supremacy. But it's about stopping people from questioning ideas and dogma.
Yeah, absolutely. To step back a little bit, FIRE, you mentioned our full acronym at the top of the show. It used to be Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. And then this last year, we expanded our mission to deal with free speech issues writ large across the country. But campus work is always going to be our bread and butter. It's a core competency for us. And these colleges and universities are important institutions here in America to train future leaders. And the situation we're seeing on campus right now is not something that our co-founders, Alan Charles Kors, who was a professor in the Enlightenment at the University of Pennsylvania, and Harvey Silverglade, who's a criminal defense attorney in Boston, anticipated. They thought that FIRE would need to exist no more than 10 or 15 years. And
Get the information out, kids would get it.
They thought it was such a scandal, right? That you would go to these places that were for the purposes of the preservation, dissemination, and creation of knowledge. You would highlight the abridgments on freedom of speech and academic freedom. People would be so shocked the reform would come so quickly, and you wouldn't need a group like FIRE anymore. We'd put ourselves out of business. But our president and CEO, Greg Lukianoff, some of your listeners might be familiar with his book, Coddling of the American Mind, which was a bestseller, talks about freedom of speech being the eternally radical idea. This idea that every generation needs to make the arguments anew for why we need to have these protections for freedom of speech. And so the arguments for censorship then are ever shifting. You know, one day it might be national security, the next day it might be hate speech, white supremacy. The thing about that, though,
or health.
Yes.
That would never happen.
No. I mean, one of the things you find right now, we're talking about a little bit about science, and science. A lot of our research universities are scientific institutions.
Supposedly.
Yeah. Any sort of divergence from orthodoxy. In particular, right now, the two controversial issues are on trans issues, especially as it applies to healthcare for minors, or trans healthcare for minors, and whether puberty blockers are appropriate at young age.
Right.
Or COVID, right? You know, I remember the discussions about masking. First, it didn't matter unless you had a properly fitting N95, and then any mask would work. But now it seems like we're back to the N95 thing. You had the lab leak theory.
Right.
And you're having people deplatformed, professors getting punished. This is still happening. We have a case at Mayo Clinic right now involving Professor Michael Joyner, who talks a little bit about convalescent plasma and whether that is appropriate to use in COVID patients who have extreme cases. And he's also commented to CNN, he's a physiologist, about trans athletes in sports. And the university has docked his pay. He's going through a disciplinary process right now. And he's criticized the NIH, and the thing about it, and I know you want to get in here, is the Mayo Clinic recently took the United States government to court to argue that it's an educational institution. They won that case because they didn't want to pay taxes on their real estate revenue. And now, when we're holding them up to the standards of education institutions, right? Dr. Michael Joyner has academic freedom. He should be able to express his opinions, core to his subject matter expertise about COVID and trans issues and the effects on health, and complain about the NIH being too bureaucratized. Right. And then he gets punished for it. And they claim, oh no, this didn't have anything to do with the educational mission of the university. This was about he's only being punished as a clinician. And so they want to have it both ways, and they want to be able to drop it into the bucket, which will allow them to police whatever speech they want.
Well, and that's the thing that concerns me the most is as COVID was unraveling in front of our eyes, more and more the podium jockeys, as I call them, started to double down on the science is settled, and because I'm from the government, that's why. And so what you wound up getting are people who were insistent that the pure, simple scientific process of questioning some dogma to see if it's real, especially in the light of more and more mounting evidence that it wasn't, is amazing to me that the politicians are saying they're doing this for our own good when they're actually putting us in greater peril by telling scientists don't do what science actually is supposed to do.
Well, here's the thing about science. Science is never settled. It's a constant conversation.
It's actually an oxymoron to say the science is settled.
No, it is. I mean, if you look at Newton's law of gravity, those were overturned in part by Albert Einstein and his theory of general relativity and the curvature of space-time. You look at this guy, Barry Marshall, who in the middle part of the century pushed back against the dogma about what created stomach ulcers. It was originally thought that it was spicy food, that it was stress, that it was stomach acid, and he said, no, it's a bacteria that causes it. And he was ridiculed for this, ridiculed. So what did he do? He made himself a broth with the bacteria that he thought started the stomach ulcers. He drank it. He got a intense case of gastroenteritis, created stomach ulcers, and now it's proof positive that stomach ulcers are not created by stress and spicy food, and he won the Nobel Prize in 2008 for it.
Well, and that's what, here at Freedomfest, one of the dirty words that I'm told we're allowed to say on YouTube now, certainly we've said it plenty on the radio, ivermectin, and long-standing, medicine, and it goes back to something we were talking earlier about trust. And it's not always just hearing what you want to hear, but you have to have faith that somebody is going to get a hearing. If I want to get rid of white supremacy, I want the white supremacists to speak so we can hear how ridiculous they sound. There were people, the science was settled at one point, that said people with brown skin were intellectually less capable than people with white skin. I think there's 1,000 people at this conference alone that would blow up that argument. That's the trouble with silencing speech, because you stop the people from questioning, hey, what's going on here, and how did you get to that answer?
Yeah, well, it's a very smart point. We know in the context of due process, right, the court system, that trust in the process is lost if people do not perceive the process to be fair.
Yeah.
They don't trust the rulings, they don't trust the rule of law. The same thing applies to science. If they see that the process to get to the so-called settled silence isn't fair, and it's not fair if you censor folks who might disagree, they're not going to trust the science. And you see that right now with the lack of trust in our institutions, right? And many of these are institutions that did use tools of censorship to try and silence folks who disagreed with them. So I think that's a very astute point. And your point about white supremacists and anyone who might hold bigoted or prejudiced beliefs is, our co-founder, Harvey Silverglate, a Jewish man, said, I want to know who the Nazi is in the room so I don't turn my back to them. This idea that you can censor people and then eliminate those ideas from the public discourse is like thinking that you can break a thermometer and change the temperature. You just don't know what the temperature is anymore.
Are we talking climate change again? Hold on a second. Now, Harvey's book, and I refer to Harvey's book, 3 Felonies a Day, all the time. And my listeners laugh at it. I was like, no, really, if they want to, this is literally out of the book, show me the person, I'll show you the crime. They'll find you on the tax, something you've done, something you've written down. And then with COVID and the vaccines and things like that, and Obamacare, there are all sorts of things that you may have filled out on one tax form that is different on another one. And this is where I think the lack of trust that you talked about, Nico, coupled with the authoritarians' zeal for control, I think is almost unquestionably intentional in the fact that they want us to distrust the system so that they can reinsert a much more authoritarian system for our own good.
Well, you don't want to assume people's worst possible motives. Christopher Hitchens once said, there's this approach in public discourse where to assume someone's worst possible motive is to assume their only possible motive. Right?
Well,
but
I'm
at
just
the same,
curious.
No,
in a lot of points.
No. I agree, and I think what we need in our public discourse is ability to hear people out with whom we disagree, and to understand, and Christopher Hitchens made this point too, that we can learn from people with whom we disagree with, even if we think they are absolutely 100% wrong. This goes back to John Stuart Mill and his argument that if you don't ever hear people with whom you disagree, then you start to hold your own beliefs as a dead dogma. I would ask your listeners, okay, what would you do if confronted with a flat earther? We know the Earth is round, right? But you're never having to marshal the arguments for why the Earth is round because you're never actually confronted with folks
and
who believe that.
They are still out there. I mean, there are people who do hold that to be
they're
true.
Still
and
out there.
The moon landing and all of that. You'll appreciate this. My son told me this when he said, well, the proof that the moon landing wasn't faked is that they were going to hire Clockwork Orange.
The actor in that is Jack Nicklaus, but I don't know who the director is. Stanley Kubrick?
Stanley Kubrick to direct the movie. The conspiracy theory is that they hired Stanley Kubrick to direct the film, and of course Kubrick couldn't get it right, so he sent him to the moon anyway, just to get the shot right. So Nico, what's coming up? What are you guys working on at FIRE that now you've expanded it from just education to everywhere?
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems like we need it everywhere. I mean, just what we've talked about here in the course of this conversation. I do just want to add one more point to what we were saying. I don't know if you remember at the end of at the fall of the Berlin Wall, this political scientist Francis Fukuyama wrote an essay, a famous essay called "The End of History." The idea that communism, socialism has fallen, capitalism has won the day, and no new systems are going to challenge its.
Right.
It ended up being a theory that didn't bear out in practice. There were plenty of challenges to the capitalist system by folks who might not know better, but
many within the capitalist
system.
system.
including. But this is, I think, censors also feel that we've reached the end of history. That there are some questions that are just answered, and we don't even need to have a discussion about them anymore.
And that's
but
dangerous.
But every censor from time immemorial has thought that they were right, and that the final and good and perfect answer has already been reached, and we did not need to countenance discourse anymore. But we need to have some historical perspective and personal humility, that some epistemic humility, the idea that we have deep convictions that are loosely held, because history has shown us that many of the most deeply held convictions have been overturned with time.
Sure.
And so I would just urge your listeners to bring that sort of grace and humility to the conversations that they're having. Yeah. It will hopefully result in some depolarization, which I think this country could use. But that's one of the things that FIRE is trying to do moving forward.
Well, and that's one of the things that I've said over and over again is that Madison, and I think George Mason in a lot of ways in his consult with Madison to creating the U.S. Constitution, their idea was this was going to happen. This kind of thing is in the human heart to do it. So the less authority we give the centralized government, the more we backstop this from happening, the more we check this ability. And I think that's the bigger problem, is the more authority the federal
Sure. And so I would just urge your listeners to bring that sort of grace and humility to the conversations that they're having. Yeah. It will hopefully result in some depolarization, which I think this country could use. But that's one of the things that FIRE is trying to do moving forward.
Well, and that's one of the things that I've said over and over again is that Madison, and I think George Mason in a lot of ways in his consult with Madison to creating the U.S. Constitution, their idea was this was going to happen. This kind of thing is in the human heart to do it. So the less authority we give the centralized government, the more we backstop this from happening, the more we check this ability. And I think that's the bigger problem, is the more authority the federal government and even the state governments take, the more likely it is that these kind of censors will have power, because if you don't have authority, who cares what somebody says, because it's not going to challenge my authority, I don't have any.
Yeah, and that's why we have our three branches of government, as you say, and that's why, for example, in this case, Missouri v. Biden, which involves interactions between federal executive agencies and social media companies, the judiciary just put an injunction on some of the communications that can happen between the executive branch and these social media companies. So the checks and balances are important, and the courts, that's FIRE's existence, right? We have a litigation department in part to check the authorities of state agencies, colleges, and universities. And so, FIRE, with our expanded mission right now, is expanding our litigation program. Here at Atlas, we just won an award here at Freedomfest, we just won an award from the Atlas Network for our expanded litigation program. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, but I think the most important thing that I want to get across to your listeners is there needs to be a 21st century free speech movement. We were looking at some of the kind of cultural campaigns that were happening before FIRE expanded in June of last year. Just as an example, Dave Chappelle. There was this big movement to cancel Chappelle, remember, because of his Netflix special, The Closer. And fortunately, actually, Netflix ended up standing by him, reformed their policies to say, no, we are...
Wavered a little bit.
Wavered, but there was no constituency making the free speech argument, writing letters to Netflix. But the folks on the other side, primarily the trans community that were offended by his jokes, didn't actually listen to his jokes, in my opinion.
That's often the case with censors.
Yeah, but I
heard from somebody that you said something I didn't like. No.
They were very organized, and they were able to put pressure on Netflix, and it bended, but it didn't break, fortunately. But it might not have bended had there been a core free speech constituency. And FIRE sees itself as an organization that we think we can rally folks who care about this issue. And we've done surveys. 95% of Americans think free speech is the most important value in the Bill of Rights. Now, it gets more complicated when you ask them, does that protect hate speech? But
that's when you start adding adjectives to the word speech, and you start saying, well, what kind of speech is it? That's where I think you open up that Pandora's box. The last one for you. You talk about a free speech movement. I see in a lot of the former Soviet bloc countries and some of Eastern Europe, there is, pardon the expression, fire. There is a conflagration of people who are pushing hard where they've never had that kind of speech before. And I'm interested in your thoughts on that, and then we'll let you get going. I know you're busy here.
Yeah. There's this old saying that immigrants like to say. It's like, count on an immigrant to do a job that a native-born American should do, right? And we see that all the time with free speeches. We have people coming into our movement, coming to work on our staff, who come from countries with authoritarian governments that understand freedom of speech, and in some cases better than Americans, because they understood what life is like without it. Yeah. And it actually, in the Twitter files, some internal emails surrounding the banning of Donald Trump from that platform were revealed. And there was this one staffer there who is from China. And you had so much groupthink going on within Twitter. They were twisting themselves in a pretzel to justify the banning of Donald Trump. But this guy said, I'm from China. I know how dangerous it is to ban dissenting opinions, to ban presidents, and so people who come from other countries with that authoritarian background, you can almost count on them being. And as Cantor Freedom, he's here at Freedomfest now. He did an ad for FIRE, talked about what it's like in Turkey.
He brought that down the house day one. I mean, he was just lit the place up. And it's like, thank you for everything you do, Nico.
Can I make one more pitch to your audience, too? I mean, we're building this movement, and I'd encourage folks to come to our website, thefire.org. We launched a membership program and an engagement and mobilization activism program at the end of last year. Anyone can sign up for our email newsletter, hear about these sort of activism campaigns that we have going on, including for Michael Joyner at the Mayo Clinic. We have a letter writing campaign to the administration there. Or you can become a FIRE member with a $25 donor, and you get a card and exclusive events and opportunities.
Well, that was going to be my question anyway. So you win winner, chicken dinner. Thank you so much. More coming up from Freedom Fest in just a little bit.
Wonderful.
So we're back at the studio here, and we've made room because Steve Milloy is going to be joining us by Zoom from Junk Science, and we get finally to break down. We had been trying earlier in the week to get his breakdown, because he did a marvelous breakdown of this ridiculous story that July 3rd and 4th were the hottest 2 days in the history of the planet, which nobody backed up, and nobody in the press ever said, hey, how do you know that? I mean, I'm sure there were periods of time when the Earth was covered with molten lava that it might have been warmer. I mean, call me crazy. I have to imagine that there were points in time when everything that grew on the planet were ferns. that it was warmer. When rainforests dominated so much of the landscape that their detritus has become petroleum that we dig out of the ground, it had to have been warmer because we don't have rainforests all over the planet anymore. And so while we're here at Freedom Fest, and some amazing stuff going on, Mike Rowe has made some killer presentations today. You can stream all this. Heather Wagenals has a great program going on at freedomfest.com where you can log in and she will share all of this stuff with you via stream. I mean, it's not every single thing because there's some great breakout sessions about activism and that kind of thing. But for the most part, it has been main stage, knock it out of the park. Ennis Freedom, formerly the basketball player, formerly known as Enes Kanter, talking about coming out of Turkey and how when he realized the NBA was in bed with China, where some of the worst human rights violations could possibly be seen were going on. And then he said, well, why is that okay in my country, Turkey, where Erdogan is not a good guy, but we look the other way because he's in NATO, is someone that the media will take cracks at for his human rights violations, and very eloquent about what human rights really look like and how hard it is to actually have and defend those human rights there. So, the Freedom Fest has been incredible so far this year. Some great folks who have been presenting. We've got Tulsi Gabbard coming up today, Robert F. Kennedy coming up on Saturday. You've got Larry Elder as well coming up, and he's going to be speaking. So we've got presidential candidates from all the parties. We even have the Libertarian candidate where they have a candidate trying to get in to the race and trying to get onto the debate stage. So that's going on here too. So joining us from junkscience.com, there he is. Finally, Steve, the segment we've been fighting with all week. I'm in one place. I'm not moving around. I'm stationary here at Freedom Fest in Memphis. I know that some of your films have been screened at the Anthem Film Festival as well. And thank you for taking some time out to debunk this whole hottest days in the history of the planet days. How are you doing, sir? And so take us into the whole hottest days in the history of the planet, because I made the point, and I'm no climate scientist, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express, and so I feel like I could probably probably get some decent mileage out of the idea that the planet's probably seen some hotter days at some point or another. Steve, so talk about that. Yeah, for some reason, my bloviations, that have said, "Oh yeah, we're good," are not coming through here because they're. I'm not hearing you somehow here. Let me just see about your mic, my mic, headphones. Maybe now I can hear you. And let's try this one. Steve, are you there? His lips are moving again. What is with us, Steve? It is just we're snake bit here. I am plugged into the right thing. Am I not? I thought I was plugged into the right thing here to hear Steve. Oh, there he is. Okay. See, So yeah, but you can ask my wife this any old time. She'll be the first one to tell you that when in doubt, it's Joe's fault. So okay, so as I said, it just seems that my presumption is that back when there was lava all over the planet, and perhaps when everything was a rainforest, the Earth may have been hotter. I mean, am I crazy to think that? Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm. So what gives them the authority to make these claims, Steve? I mean, obviously they know nobody in the press is going to say, "Hey, where's that guy?" I mean, they never asked Michael Mann where his hockey stick came from. So, yeah. Okay, so then how is your message getting out that this was all bunkum, that this was, this is all BS? Because I've watched, and I think it's easily 7 or 8 to 1 stories that gobbled this up like it was manna from heaven, versus, the people saying, yeah, I don't think that's exactly what happened. Hmm. Right. So what was their agenda with this? Was this that all the king's horses and all the king's men haven't been able to push this agenda far enough? Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Hmm. And that's a good thing. I'm glad to see that their narrative is dying. But what is their persistence built on? What is their persistence? Is this because there's a lot of money that has already been funded to them, and that they need to keep up with the Joneses? People have already paid for this ad. Mm. Mm-hmm. Right. Oh gosh. Yeah. Yeah. If. Mm-hmm. So what do we have to keep doing? Keep doing what we're doing here, Steve. Keep doing, segments like this. Keep publishing at junk sites. Keep publishing new books.
It's artificial intelligence. In the end, I don't have a crystal ball, but I do know you're 100% right. If you look at opportunity through the lens of AI, you're going to see very clearly a list of jobs that will be replaced, very clearly a list of jobs that we can't. Our foundation, what we do is focus on those jobs that cannot be outsourced. Now, so what works is the foundation, the podcast. That podcast, the way I heard it, which people seem to like, check it out. MichaelWorks.org is where you go find more.
Well, and I think one of the important things that we have to remind people of, Steve, is that we're not in favor of polluting the planet. We're not here saying, we need less forests. We're not those guys, but that seems to be the hair on fire rhetoric that they throw around out there.
Someone that's just sort of down the rabbit how do you feel free this?
Yep.
What is it that you I believe that the trust that you historically had as our institutions is very loaded to a point where we can't simply take people's word. That's a little scary.
Well, let me ask you this though, then, Steve. Considering how much money has been invested in this, if I own a restaurant and I had investors who invested into that restaurant, and I kept saying, no, this year we're going to invent the new Big Mac. This year we're going to become number one. We're going to supplant Burger King, McDonald's, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Chick-fil-A. We're going to knock them all off the pedestal. And they keep giving me money, saying, oh, Joe, maybe I'm an eloquent speaker and I pitch really well. Eventually they're going to say, we're going somewhere else with our money. I mean, how lucrative is this, and how deep are these pockets? Well, but that's what I'm asking is who's making the money here, because they keep sending it.
Here's what comes out. I listened to or to product. You're not forced. So in that conversation, they talk about your child. And so obviously a pretty well person said, this is my wheelhouse. Oh, there's this book. A lot of the highlights that
Right.
we saw
Gosh. Well, yeah, so but somebody is taking that money home with them. That's what I'm getting at. It is the classic, taxing Peter to pay Paul. So at some point they can't. Can they? They can't be profiting from this. Is this just some long game that they're playing, saying, you know what? The amount of profit I'm going to make when we finally dispatch guys like Steve Milloy and all that, is going to be so enormous that it's going to be worth all the hemorrhaging, the losing money. I mean, the only group that seems to lose money as much as the green energy people and get bad results is Hollywood, Steve.
Here's what I would say. I wouldn't have
Oh my God!
That's when I said, doesn't seem to understand
Right.
You just can't.
With no grid to charge them, but yeah.
Our experts, to answer your question, what has to happen is our expert class has to step up.
So what is the next thing? I mean, we just debunked the hottest days in the history of the planet. That went out the window. I think even the media dropped that one pretty quickly. I think it was July 5th, 6th or 7th. They said, I'm taking some hits, around the cocktail party circuit. There people are laughing at me, and nobody in the media likes being laughed at except me anyway. So especially the comics, because they're not funny. But Steve, so what do you think the next gambit is? Is it going to be extinctions? I hear people talking about extinctions, which is funny because I think the wind farms in the Atlantic off Virginia's coast are actually going to bring on some extinctions.
And the media has to help. They have to lead. We need a skeptical and big degree that doubts every single thing they hear. If we don't have a plan, we're going to be left to figure it out for ourselves. It's an economy, science, media, vaccine, combination of James, I'm going to throw in challenge at it. And you're supposed to celebrate the challenge because you sound, you're now on Facebook, you're trying to bring that to those that you know about. So, hey, you're not recognizing your outlet. I mean, so the green part, even though the first word, it's not common. So it's not we lost the four things of which job was challenging.
Well, now you were there. You went in when President Trump was elected. You were part of his landing team, quote unquote, at the Environmental Protection Agency. And, I can usually, start a conversation with Chris Horner and walk away and get a cup of tea because he just gets in there and goes. But he's always kind of got this 10-mile stare when I ask him about what happened during that whole period. So if Donald Trump, the iconoclast, can't blow up the EPA, I mean, take us inside, what's going to happen, whoever the next president is. Oh, yeah, that's right. You.
And so you satisfied that name is now a top market. So yes, we must be passionate about curiosity, but I would say also the skepticism thing is so important. I have a problem
Well, that's the shame.
I don't think it's true. I think it is. But they aren't famous. Right? They're no passion. Right? And he's in jail. He's challenged to prove his existence. So he basically says, I think therefore.
Well, and that's the thing that I think is the most important of these, the West Virginia versus EPA ruling, is I think it gives you the tools to say, okay, you have to go to Congress. Lisa Jackson, you can't be emailing with Greenpeace and writing policy. You've got to go see Congress for the policies for what you want. Is that one of the tools we didn't have before, Steve?
They shouldn't be scared. They should be curious to figure out how to fix it. They should be determined to win back their recognition. They should apologize for being hypocritical. They should admit when they're wrong. You want to win the trust back to your conservatives? Well, the first thing you have to do is honestly and sincerely apologize. And then you have to do something about it. This, I forget his name, I just read an article yesterday. The CEO of that brand said, I accept. Listen, this is on me. This was my fault. And then he did it. He talked about it. As opposed to good.
What's coming up next for you, Steve? What are you working on at Junk Science? And are you ready to publish a new book? What's coming up? Well, it was still bailing then. I've got a bigger bucket. That's what I've got.
So he's 100% responsible. He's not resigning. He's not. As a result, he's set back. And he's introduced his mind replacement. I believe she or he, as her head screwed on straight, will work hard to bring back his trust. So we're going to take the same challenge that you deserve. To violate trust.
Well, but that is climate to me, because Governor Youngkin in Virginia, our home state, has said all of the above, and that includes, these micro-nuclear plants, Mr. Fusion on the back of your DeLorean or whatever it may be. But, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about, more nuclear and perhaps even looking at best practices in places like France, where they've done it pretty well. Yeah. Well, we're going to need a Yucca Mountain. I think it was Senator Johnson said we're going to need a Yucca Mountain-size disposal site just for all the Tesla batteries and other batteries that we need to get rid of. And that's another part of the con is the solar panels and the automobile batteries that we're supposed to be mandated into buying. They're filthy.
That's not real. And guys like us, what can you accept? Speak our piece, push the holder.
Gee.
There's also our own homes. There's our own personal economy. There's our own sense of the world. And if we can get that holder, we have it. So that's what I do like about religion today. And what I do like about this conference. In the end, there is still the reference for the individual. And the belief.
Yeah, Payson, yeah. Well, and you mentioned farmland. I just heard the USDA chief say that they tilled under 40% of America's farmland because the crops failed because of fertilizer shortage. Fertilizer shortage. Marty, fertilizer shortage. Isn't fertilizer made of natural gas? Oops. Yeah, just in Washington, D.C. alone, I think we have enough. Steve Milloy, junkscience.com. Go look at that piece. I just gave it a glance. It's terrific about the nuclear, and that's got to be part of the future because like medical science, the more we stick our head in the sand and say the science is settled. First off, it's one of the great new oxymorons in the American lexicon. But the more we do ourselves, quote unquote, dirty, right, Steve? Yeah, well, I appreciate it, and I appreciate your time. Thank you for keeping trying. We tried. This is our third time is a charm in it, and I appreciate it. Steve Milloy, thank you, sir. You have a great afternoon, and thank you all for watching the Constitutional today. We had a good time today, and we'll do it again tomorrow from Freedomfest. It's weird because it's 2 o'clock here at 3 o'clock where you are in most cases, unless it's even earlier. Who even knows from there? But until tomorrow, so long, and thanks for all the fish.